After ignoring her for years, the Duke found her packing her suitcase in complete silence. The morning mist clung to the walls of Ashbourne Castle like a cold, heavy veil. Lady Alara moved quietly through her chambers, her hands tracing the edges of old, familiar furniture as if saying a silent goodbye. The room smelled faintly of cedar and candle wax, scents she had grown up with, yet now they only reminded her of the years she had spent waiting for someone who had never truly seen her. Her suitcase sat open on the bed, half filled with her belongings. She paused, holding a delicate porcelain figurine in her hands. It was of a woman standing in a storm, her cloak swept by the wind. Alara had loved this piece as a child, long before she had known the sharp sting of loneliness. Now it seemed to mock her, a symbol of a life she could no longer endure under the shadow of a man who had ignored her for so long. Outside, the wind whispered against the castle walls. The echoes of the distant sea clashing against the cliffs carried a sadness she could almost taste. Each sound reminded her of the silence that had grown between her and Duke Roderick, the very silence that now made her packing a quiet act of rebellion. She did not shout, did not cry, but the deliberate precision of her movements spoke louder than words ever could. She folded her dresses carefully, each motion precise, almost ritualistic. A blush of memory flickered across her mind as she thought of the countless nights she had spent in the drawing room, reading letters she would never send, longing for a smile or a glance from him. Roderick had been distant, courteous yet cold, his eyes often drifting toward ambitions, alliances, and affairs that had nothing to do with her. She had tried to forget, tried to move on, yet the heart does not so easily obey. A soft knock echoed through the corridor. Alara froze for a heartbeat, but the sound of the wind overtook it. She did not move to answer. She had been waiting for years for the sound of his voice, and yet she had learned the painful truth. Sometimes the silence tells more than words ever could. Moments later, the heavy door creaked. Roderick's figure appeared, tall and imposing in the doorway. Even after all this time, his presence had a weight, like the gravity of storms before a tempest. His eyes, sharp and calculating, softened slightly as they fell on the figure of Alara bent over her suitcase. "Alara," he said, voice careful, almost cautious. She did not look up. Her hands continued folding, her expression calm but distant. There was no anger in her tone, no need for confrontation. Silence had become her armor, her declaration that she no longer waited. "I see, you are leaving," he continued, stepping further into the room. The floorboards creaked beneath his boots. "After all these years." Alara finally lifted her gaze, and for a moment their eyes met. His were stormy, deep, filled with something she could not name. Regret, perhaps, though he would never admit it so easily. She did not answer, letting the quiet fill the space between them. "Why now?" he asked, a note of vulnerability in his voice that startled even him. "After all this time, why this moment?" Alara set the figurine gently into the suitcase, her fingers brushing its smooth surface as if acknowledging its memory. "Because now," she said softly, "I understand that waiting for you has only chained me to the past. I cannot stay here anymore." Roderick took a step closer, but he did not touch her. His pride and his regret warred within him. He wanted to apologize, to beg her to stay, yet the words caught in his throat. Too much time had passed. Too many nights had gone unanswered. She zipped the suitcase with finality, the metallic sound like a chime marking the end of something long endured. "I have lived under your shadow for too long," she said, her voice steady. "It is time I stand in the light of my own life." Roderick felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest. For the first time, he saw her not as a companion, not as a familiar presence to overlook, but as a woman who had endured and grown, whose quiet dignity now shone brighter than any courtly display. "Alara," he began, but the word faltered. It was no longer a summons, but a plea. She met his gaze, unwavering, her eyes reflecting a storm of sorrow, strength, and resolve. "Do not speak as if the years did not happen," she said softly. "Do not act as if this is a surprise. The truth has always been clear. You simply chose to ignore it." The room seemed to grow colder. Shadows stretched along the walls, the morning light failing to reach the corners where dust and forgotten memories lingered. Roderick felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. He wanted to argue, to remind her of their past, of shared dinners, dances, and fleeting moments of laughter, but all of that now seemed hollow. Her silence had spoken louder than any speech, louder than any remorse he could offer. "Have you truly decided?" he asked, voice almost breaking. Alara nodded once, slowly. She picked up her coat and draped it over her arm. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, as if teaching him that she would not be swayed by sentiment alone. Roderick's mind raced, images flashing before him. Nights he had spent with other matters, dismissing her letters unopened, letting her stand alone in halls filled with warmth that had been denied her. A bitterness rose in him, but not for her, only for himself, for the years he had wasted, for the heart he had ignored. "Please," he said finally, voice low, a whisper against the storm of emotion he could no longer contain, "do not leave without hearing me." Alara paused, her hand resting lightly on the suitcase handle. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the man behind the title, the man capable of love but blinded by pride, a man whose soul bore the weight of neglect. "I am listening," she said. Roderick drew in a shaky breath. He did not yet know what to say, or if words could ever mend what silence had broken. The castle itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the truth, for the confrontation that had been delayed too long. He stepped closer, careful, as if approaching a fragile creature. I have been blind," he admitted, each word tasting of years of regret. "I did not see you, Alara, not truly, and perhaps I feared the depth of my own feelings. I thought ambition and duty were enough to fill the space between us, but I see now I was wrong." Alara's eyes glimmered with unshed tears. She had heard apologies before, and they had always sounded empty. Yet in this moment, there was something different, a tremor of sincerity, a vulnerability that made her chest ache with both sorrow and longing. "And yet," she said quietly, "your blindness has cost us both. My patience is not endless, and my heart has learned to survive without you. If you wish to speak, then speak fully. Leave nothing unsaid, Duke Roderick." He nodded, swallowing hard. The weight of the years pressed down on him, yet he felt strangely alive, as if the storm outside mirrored the storm within. "I cannot undo the past," he said softly, "but will try to be present now if you allow me. I will no longer ignore you, Alara, no matter the cost." Her hand lingered on the suitcase, a barrier yet also a promise. She did not answer immediately, letting the tension hang between them like the mist outside the windows. The silence was no longer bitter, but expectant. A distant clap of thunder shook the walls, and the wind rattled the glass. It was as if the castle itself sensed the fragile truce forming between them, a world suspended between storm and calm. Finally, Alara exhaled slowly. "I am not the same girl who waited silently for your attention," she said. "I have grown, and I will not be forgotten again. If you wish to be part of my life, Duke, you must step into it fully, not as a master of lands, but as a man willing to see me as I am." Roderick's heart pounded. He reached out almost instinctively, though he did not touch her. "Then guide me," he whispered, voice trembling. "Tell me how to be worthy of you, Alara. Show me before it is too late." Her fingers brushed the suitcase handle once more. A single tear slipped down her cheek, catching the dim light of the chamber. She did not speak, letting the moment linger, a moment heavy with possibility, regret, and the fragile hope of redemption. Outside, the storm broke fully, lightning illuminating the cliffs and crashing waves below. Inside, the storm of emotions between them raged in silence, each heartbeat echoing the weight of years lost. And in that silence, Alara made a choice, a choice that could either bind them together or break them forever. She lifted the suitcase, and for the first time in years, Roderick felt the full gravity of her resolve. The storm outside roared louder, and he knew, with a sudden, chilling clarity, that if she left, she might never return. Yet the moment hung suspended, fragile and electrifying. And the castle, ancient and watchful, seemed to whisper in the dark, "The reckoning has begun." The storm outside Ashbourne Castle had not fully passed. Rain lashed the stone walls, and gusts of wind rattled windows like restless spirits. Inside, the tension between Duke Roderick and Lady Alara hung thick, heavier than the storm itself. The silence of the previous morning had given way to a fragile confrontation, one that neither could yet name, and neither fully trusted. Roderick stood by the window, watching sheets of rain blur the view of the cliffs below. He could hear the waves crashing against jagged rocks, a relentless rhythm that mirrored his own turbulent thoughts. For years, ambition had guided him, yet it had blinded him to the heart that had waited silently beside him. Now, as he watched Alara moving with quiet determination, he understood the full cost of his neglect. Alara had returned to the room after arranging her belongings. She paused near the fireplace, staring into the dying embers, lost in thought. Her heart still trembled from the sight of him, from the sudden awareness that the man who had ignored her for so long now stood on the precipice of admitting his fault. She could feel the years between them as clearly as she could feel the storm's chill pressing in on her. "You have always carried yourself with grace," Roderick said finally, breaking the silence. "Even when I could not see it, even when I failed you." His voice was low, unsteady, tinged with regret. Alara did not answer immediately. She remained still, letting his words settle in the space between them. His acknowledgement was something she had longed for, yet it could not erase the years of solitude. She had grown stronger in that silence, stronger than he could fully understand. "Words are easy," she said finally, her tone calm but firm. "It is actions that speak of the heart, Duke. Words may come after regret, but they cannot undo what has been lost." Roderick's gaze fell to the floor. He knew she was right. For years he had relied on appearances, on the illusion of control. Now, faced with the possibility of losing her forever, he felt the truth. His pride had been his prison, and she had been its unwitting victim. "I will not ask you to forget," he admitted, "nor will I ask you to stay if your heart wishes otherwise. But I cannot bear to let you leave without showing you the depth of what I feel, what I have always felt." Alara studied him carefully. There was a raw sincerity in his eyes that had never been there before. Yet the heart is a cautious thing, shaped by years of patience and disappointment. She could not simply believe him, not fully, not yet. The castle seemed to respond to their emotions. The storm's fury softened, though shadows lingered in the corners of the chamber. Alara felt it in the air, a strange heaviness, almost as if the castle itself had been holding its breath, waiting for this confrontation. Roderick stepped closer, though he remained careful, respecting the invisible boundary she had drawn. "There are things you do not know," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "A curse, long buried, tied to my family. It grows stronger with neglect, with coldness, with the failures of those who come before me. I fear that it has been my own blindness that has awakened it." Alara's brow furrowed. She had heard whispers in the halls, tales of shadows that moved on their own, of objects misplaced and doors closing without reason. The castle had always carried an air of mystery, but now, with Roderick speaking of a curse, it felt as though the walls themselves were alive, listening and judging. "Tell me everything," she said softly. "I will hear it, but no words will sway me unless I can feel their truth." Roderick nodded and began to recount the hidden history of Ashbourne Castle. Centuries ago, a duke of his line had wronged a woman of power, a witch who had cursed the family to endure the weight of their neglect and ambition. Since then, every generation had faced shadows that mirrored their failures, and he had long assumed his ambition would shield him. But he was wrong. His neglect of Alara, the one person who had truly loved him, had stirred the curse into life. As he spoke, the room seemed to darken, shadows stretching and twisting along the walls. Candles flickered violently, though no breeze disturbed them. The castle had a life of its own, Alara realized, reacting to the honesty now laid bare. She could feel the weight of the curse, a chill creeping along her spine, threatening to touch both their hearts. "You carry so much responsibility," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "But responsibility without compassion is empty. You have been given a chance to see your mistakes. Do not squander it." Roderic's eyes shone with unshed tears. He had faced battles, political schemes, and rivals that would have toppled lesser men, yet none of those challenges had compared to the weight of the heart he had ignored. Now, the man who had been defined by pride felt smaller, humbled, and yet more alive than he had ever been. The room fell into a tense silence once again. Alara moved closer to the window, watching the storm clouds part to reveal a sliver of pale morning light. It reminded her of hope, fragile but real, waiting to be claimed. She felt the stirrings of an old, familiar longing, tempered by caution. She would not allow herself to be swept away by words alone. Suddenly, a shadow moved along the far wall, flickering in the corner of her vision. She turned sharply, heart quickening, but saw nothing. Roderick noticed the shift in her expression and followed her gaze. "Do not fear," he said softly. "Whatever haunts these halls cannot touch us if we face it together, but you must trust me as I trust you now, even if it is difficult." Alara studied him, searching for any trace of deceit, but all she saw was sincerity mixed with fear. She felt the weight of her own heart, fragile and cautious. Could she allow herself to step closer, even as the storm of the curse loomed? Could she risk opening herself to a man who had once been blind to her existence? As if the castle itself responded to their unspoken question, a gust of wind slammed against the windows, rattling the glass and sending a shiver through the room. Books slid from shelves, landing in precise disorder, and the shadows seemed to twist with intent. It was a reminder that the past, though silent, still had power. Roderick stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Alara, I cannot promise that the path ahead will be easy. The curse, the shadows, they are real and they test us, but I can promise that I will face them with you. I will not falter again. I will not let pride or ambition blind me from what is most precious." Alara's eyes softened, yet she remained guarded. The years had taught her patience, the necessity of caution. "I want to believe you," she said quietly, "but I cannot yet. Words are fragile. Actions are what endure." He nodded, understanding. "Then let me show you," he whispered. "Let me prove that I can be different." The air between them seemed to shift, charged with unspoken emotion. The castle settled slightly, as though acknowledging a fragile truce. Yet even in that moment of stillness, the shadows lingered, reminding them that the past was never truly gone, and the curse was never fully silent. Alara picked up her suitcase once more, as if to test her own resolve. She glanced at Roderick, measuring the truth in his eyes. He had always been her world, and yet he had abandoned it. Now, the man who once ignored her was standing before her, pleading not with grand gestures, but with honesty and vulnerability. For a moment, the storm outside mirrored the storm in her heart. She could hear the crashing waves, feel the weight of years lost, and yet somewhere beneath the sorrow a spark of hope flickered. Could the past be mended? Could a heart long ignored be rekindled? And then, as the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the room with pale light, a voice whispered from the shadows, low and ancient, carrying a warning she could not ignore. "The heart that has been abandoned cannot return unscathed, unless the bond is proven in the fire of truth." Alara stiffened, sensing the presence of something unseen. Roderick stepped beside her, placing a tentative hand near hers without touching it, a silent pledge of unity. "Whatever comes," he said softly, "we face it together. I will not abandon you again." Her fingers brushed against the suitcase handle, a symbol of her independence, her strength, and the choice that still rested in her hands. She felt the weight of the curse, the shadows of the past, and the fragile possibility of a future where they could stand together. The storm outside raged once more, as though challenging their resolve. And in that roar, in the clash of wind and wave, both felt it clearly. The reckoning was not yet over, and the castle held secrets still waiting to be revealed. Alara looked at Roderick, her expression a mixture of caution and longing. She could step forward into hope or step back into safety. The decision was hers. And as lightning illuminated the hall, casting long, twisting shadows across the walls, she whispered almost to herself, "If he truly remembers me, then he must prove it before the shadows claim us." The storm had not passed. The curse had not lifted. But something new had begun, something neither could ignore, something that could either bind them together or tear them apart forever. The storm had passed, leaving Ashbourne Castle shrouded in a pale, ghostly light. Mist curled around the towers and cloisters, and the scent of wet stone mingled with the faint aroma of cedar from the hearths. The castle felt quieter now, as though it had paused, waiting for the final act of its long-held drama. Lady Alara stood near the large arched window, her hands clasped together. The suitcase she had packed lay closed on the bed, a symbol of choices she had almost made. Her gaze was fixed on the cliffs below, where the waves of the distant sea broke into white foam against jagged rocks. The years of waiting, the years of being overlooked had shaped her, hardened her, but also given her clarity. Duke Roderick approached quietly, his boots echoing softly on the stone floor. He carried no grand gestures, no declarations, only the truth of his heart and the humility born of regret. He stopped a few paces behind her, not daring to bridge the distance until she allowed it. "Alara," he said softly, voice low, almost a whisper, "I have seen what my pride has done, not just to you, but to myself. The curse, the shadows, the years I lost, it has shown me that nothing matters if I cannot see you, truly see you." Alara did not turn immediately. She had learned to guard her heart, to measure the depth of sincerity in words. Yet the storm had revealed something deeper in him, a man stripped of pretense, standing bare before her. "You speak of seeing me," she said quietly, "but words alone cannot undo the years of silence. Can you truly step into my life, Roderick, as it is now, not as it once was?" He took a slow breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "I can try. I will try. I cannot change the past, but I can live the present with truth. I will not let pride or fear keep me from you again." A flicker of shadow moved across the far wall, subtle but undeniable. The curse, though diminished, still lingered in the corners of the ancient chamber. It seemed to test them, as if the castle itself demanded proof of the sincerity Roderick claimed. Alara turned to face him fully, her hands lightly touching the suitcase. "Then show me," she said simply, "not with words but with the courage of your heart. Actions must speak, for the past cannot be rewritten by promises alone." Roderick stepped closer, cautiously closing the distance. "Then I will begin," he said, "not by asking for forgiveness but by standing with you, by honoring the strength you have always carried, even when I could not see it." He reached for her hand and she did not pull away. The touch was light, almost tentative, yet it carried the weight of years of longing and regret. A warmth spread through her chest, softening the edges of her guarded heart. The castle shivered again, a low rumble echoing through its halls. Shadows twisted, then receded, as though acknowledging the tentative bond forming between them. The curse was still present, but it had begun to yield, responding to the honesty and bravery of two hearts finally confronting the truth. Roderick guided her to the center of the room, where the morning light now streamed in, scattering across the stone floor. "We must face it together," he said, his voice steady. Whatever remains of the curse, whatever shadows linger, we face them as one. Not as Duke and Lady, but as people who have loved, lost, and now have a chance to begin anew. Elara studied him, her eyes reflecting the faint glimmer of hope, cautious yet undeniable. And if we fail, she asked softly, then we face it together, he replied. If we falter, if the curse tests us again, we do not run, we do not hide. We endure it because some bonds are worth more than fear, worth more than pride, worth more than time itself. For a moment, the room was silent except for the gentle sound of their breathing. The storm had passed outside, but a different kind of storm lingered within, one of fear, hope, and the fragile possibility of love reborn. Then, from the shadows of the room, a subtle shift occurred. The air seemed lighter, the oppressive weight of centuries of neglect lifting just slightly. The whispers that had haunted the corridors faded. The curse, though still a presence, no longer demanded fear. It demanded proof, and it seemed to recognize that proof was finally being offered. Elara released a slow breath, feeling the tension in her body ease. She looked at Roderick, really looked, seeing not the distant, ambitious man of the past, but someone capable of growth, capable of change, and capable of love. She felt the long-forgotten spark of trust stirring, fragile but real. "Very well," she said quietly. "Then let this be the beginning, not of what we once were, but of what we can become." Roderick's lips curved into a small, almost relieved smile. "Then we begin together," he whispered. The castle seemed to respond once more. Light filled the chamber, soft and golden, reflecting in the polished surfaces and illuminating the corners where shadows had lingered. The oppressive weight of silence and neglect lifted, replaced by a new, fragile harmony. Elara took her suitcase, but this time it was no longer a symbol of departure. Instead, it represented her strength and independence, a reminder that she could leave if she chose, but that she now had the power to stay if the heart before her deserved it. She set the suitcase aside, stepping closer to Roderick. Their hands met fully this time, fingers intertwining. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried all the emotions that words could not express: longing, forgiveness, courage, and hope. "Whatever comes," she said softly, "we face it together. Shadows, curses, regrets, we endure them together." Roderick nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Together," he echoed. The castle, ancient and watchful, seemed to sigh in approval. The air was lighter, freer, as though centuries of pain had finally been acknowledged and met with courage. The curse had not vanished entirely, but it had been tempered by truth and sincerity, and for the first time in generations, it no longer ruled the hearts of those within its walls. Outside, the sun broke fully through the mist, casting light over the cliffs and waves. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, yet the air retained the faint tang of past struggles, a reminder that life is never without challenge and love is never without effort. Roderick stepped closer to Elara, his forehead resting lightly against hers. "I will not fail you again," he whispered. "I will honor you not because I am a duke, but because I see you and because I love you truly." Elara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words settle deep within her. The ache of years, the loneliness of countless nights, the fear of being unseen, all of it seemed to melt away in the warmth of his presence. She felt the first true flicker of peace she had known in a long time. "And I will not demand more than you can give," she whispered in return. "But I will stand by you, Roderick, if you are willing to stand by me, not as a duke and his lady, but as two souls who have weathered storms and found each other again." He smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then we face the future together," he said. For a long moment they simply stood there, hand in hand, hearts beating in a tentative harmony. The castle around them seemed alive, watching, approving, and for once not oppressive. The shadows had retreated, the weight of the curse had eased, and the promise of love, tempered by years of endurance and understanding, filled the room. Ilara glanced at her suitcase one final time. It remained closed, untouched, a silent testament to her strength and her choice. She did not need it now. She had chosen a new path, one that led not away from the man who had ignored her, but toward a future forged in honesty, courage, and the possibility of redemption. And as the morning light bathed them, Roderick realized that the greatest battle was not the curses of the past, nor the ambitions of the future, but the simple, profound act of seeing and being seen, of loving and being loved in return. The wind outside whispered against the walls of Ashbourne Castle, soft and gentle now, carrying with it the scent of rain-washed stone and distant sea spray. The storm was gone, the shadows had receded, and the hearts within the castle had found their first fragile peace. Ilara took a deep breath and leaned slightly against him, letting the warmth of his presence fill the spaces of her heart that had been empty for so long. Roderick held her close, not possessively, but protectively, with respect and a devotion earned through years of reflection. And in that quiet, golden morning, they both understood the truth. Love, once abandoned, could return, but only when it was met with courage, honesty, and the willingness to face even the shadows that lingered from the past. For the first time in many years, the walls of Ashbourne Castle seemed alive, not with whispers of neglect or sorrow, but with the soft, enduring echo of two hearts learning to beat together again. And somewhere deep within its stones, the ancient curse paused, as if acknowledging that love, sincere and steadfast, could indeed tame even the oldest shadows.